Hello there, and thank you for joining me again. In this final segment, we will look at visualizing our data, which has come from a variety of data sources, including Hadoop, SQL Server, and Excel. We're going to do this in PowerView in Excel 2013. The reason I've chosen this is due to its accessibility, and I believe in opening up data for the masses and big data, and Excel is such a nice friendly way to do that. So here we have a very simple table. A table is a valid data visualization in itself, and we're going to call this Sandy Evacuation. So I've renamed the sheet down at the bottom. We can see our data model appears on the right hand side. We can only see the active sheet though. So what we have here is the active sheet is showing only one table, but when we look at all, we can see all of our tables. So we're more interested in all. This table just simply shows us the state and the abbreviation for the state name. We can see our other data sources, so we see our census data, which came from HDFS, which is Hadoop Distributed File Server, and that was on Windows Azure and it's Microsoft's distribution of Azure. We also see the flash flood data, which is coming from SQL Server. It's all been unified together using Power Pivot, which is under the hood of PowerView. So we could look at using themes, for example, in order to change how the data is displayed. Colour is a very important way of conveying a message when we look at data. So what we have here is different ways of visualising the data. PowerView is very click and tick. It's very simple to use, providing that the data model has been set up properly and the data has been provisioned for the business users to consume and interact with. So we can see here that we have our state information and we have the short state information as well. We see state appears with a small icon next to it as country does. And that's PowerView's way of conveying that the underlying data is a geography data type. And that means we could use a map in order to convey messages about that data. So what we have here is country and state information displayed in a table in the left hand side, and we see the fields which are located in the right hand side. When we put our mouse over them, it tells us the data source that the particular column has come from. So we are going to take HR 1, 3 and 6. Now these metrics give us information about the flash floods and where they've taken place. We could add in some other data points as well. Now these data points have got a sigma next to them, which is the Greek symbol, and basically it means a sum. We're also going to take the latitude and the longitude as well. So we have all of these data points in this table, and we've simply click and ticked in order to display that data quite simply. But tables are never always enough for business users. We need to see the patterns in the data. And very fortunately, PowerView allows us a number of different ways in order to really visualize the data and make it much more rich for business users. In the bottom right hand side, we can see all of our fields. We want to change it, so we've put state at the very top. It's very simple to change the ordering. So we've put in an average of latitude and an average of longitude. That gives us the data we're looking at and the data that we need in order to visualize it. We may, for example, want this data to appear on a map. So here we have our table with all of our data in it. And then we can look at changing that information the way it's displayed. So we have a map and we have a number of other very simple visualizations which are very simple for business users to interact with and also to understand. It gives us a clear message of the data as well. So when we click on map, for example, What we see here is that we need internet access, because at this point PowerView will go to Bing and go and collect the map that we are looking for, and then displays it. We see the data is displayed as well. Now the colour has been used here to convey the different states. So for example, we have bright green as being Vermont, for example. On the bottom right hand side, we see that the size of the balls are actually related to H1, but we could use HR6 instead. This is specific information about the individual flash flood. The locations we have is county. We're going to remove that field, and we could put something else in instead. So let's use geography. This is our geography hierarchy that we set up earlier when we set up the calculations in Power Pivot. Now the data looks much more accurate. It's cleaner and it's easier to get the summary of the information. There's a gentleman by the name of Ben Schneiderman who talks about visualizing data, and he talks about the golden rules of information visualization, where people want a summary of information first. And that's what we have here. And then people want a bit more detail, and that's what we've moved to here. So what we have done here is we've used a small pie chart, which is fine to use on a map, and the colour is actually showing a message about the data. It's showing the percentage of individuals in that state that are over or under the 69-year-old barrier. Now the pie charts don't actually add up to 100%, so we're going to have a look at that as well. We can look at that data to see if the data is wrong, but until we start to visualise the data, then it doesn't give us an idea of if the data is wrong and how wrong it could be, for example. In the meantime, what we can do is start to look at the data in terms of road maps. This might be more meaningful to a business user, for example. We could also filter the data as well. So Ben Schneiderman talks about people wanting the summary of the data first, and then talking about they want to zoom and filter on that information. So it's the second stage really of visualising the data using Excel. So that's what's on our map at the moment. It might give us a useful summary. It might raise more questions, such as the percentage of population, for example. And we may want to filter that information so we can see it displayed on the screen and focus on certain areas rather than others. So we could look at state information, for example, and we could look at very specific states. We could do an actual search so that the states returned are the ones which match a particular criteria, for example. We don't have just states as well, we have information here which shows we don't want data that's blank. So blank data or nulls could give us an impact on our data, for example, so that's a useful starting point. We do the same for county as well. We start to just consider data that is not blank anywhere, and we apply the filter, and we see if that appears to tell or to change the story of the data that's been visualised. So when we go back to PowerView, for example, we can see the options that are available to us. For example, maybe we want to revise the relationships. What we can do is use some of the default Excel functionality, such as adding in a text box. This might be a useful way of annotating the visualization, for example. So here we are denoting the evacuation targets. percentage of population by county. So we could use that instead of a title, for example, or we could use it as a way of visualising a further point about the data. So here we're stretching it so that it looks better. So we start to move things around so that it starts to look a bit neater. So we can add in further text boxes as well. These might be useful instead of the actual titles. For example, it's very easy to manipulate the way in which the text is displayed. And also gives the Power View itself a less Power View look, where we have a default table that appears on the page at the top at the middle. Instead, we can start to get a bit creative. So that's better. We've changed some of the fonts quite easily in that text box. You can see how simple it's been to create a pie chart which is based on data from different data sources, and we've just popped it all in the same place. From the perspective of the business user, they don't really need to know that some of the data's come from HDFS, some of it's come from SQL Server, and some of it's come from Excel. This business user is primarily interested in getting the data that they need in order to make a definitive decision for the enterprise. So we can see what we have here at the bottom left hand side is a small table of all of the states, and we can hopefully use that in order to filter what appears in the main screen, for example. Okay. So what we can do, for example, is increase the font size to make it a bit more clear if we want. And we can see that can help to make the table a bit more readable. Speaking as someone who wears glasses, I tend to like the font to be a bit larger. We can see the data is being filtered, so we're going to clear the filter. We can see that the filter contains no more filters in the filter area. So we can start to filter by specific states if we like. We don't want blank data, and that means that our table can also be filtered as well. We could also filter by county as well. So we've maintained the constraints that the county and state information we have should not be blank. It's not included. But what we do is we use this table in order to filter what appears in the main page. This is a very simple and a very easy way in order to allow people to filter the data that they're looking for. Again, it's consistent with the research conducted by people like Ben Schneiderman, who talk about filtering and zooming the data. What Power View is letting you do is it's allowing you to create very simple visualizations in such a way that it's consistent with the current state of play and understanding around data visualization and how it affects individuals and how we can try to make data visualizations that look better and more clear to users. So here we are back with the map, and we also have the table of the data below. So we could take the short state this time, for example, and hopefully or surely people outside the US would be able to see the short states and we would understand what those might be. So we can click that information and we get a series of metrics appearing. So what we can do here is look at some other charts as well. So what we have here is a very simple chart. What we need to do is clear the filters and hopefully we can see that a bit more clearly. But it's bottom right hand side, we can see we've just got a number of metrics run by the short state. So when we click on main, for example, it's highlighted to show us the data a bit more clearly.